Record. Okay. All right. If you are logging in to the webinar, thank you so much for being here. We're going to wait just another minute or two for everyone to log in. I will just make sure all of my settings are where they should be. Okay. Okay, good. That's good. All right. Okay. Okay, and just for those of us who are still joining, we're just going to wait a few more minutes just to make sure we give everyone a chance to get on the call today. So we're just going to wait another minute or two. How are you, Lindsey?
I'm doing great. Happy to be here with you, Angela.
Thank you for coming on today. We'll just wait one more minute or two.
Sure. So I'm curious, while we wait, how long have you been hosting interviews or podcasts, Angela?
I have been podcasting for, well, my homestead education podcast that I have with a co-host. We're on our 5th season. And then I did, 1 or 2 seasons before that on a different podcast. And then we had a host that had a baby and decided she didn't have time for it anymore. So then we restarted. So yeah, I guess 7 seasons of podcasting.
That's wonderful. You've had
Yeah.
some great people on. I was excited. Gabe Brown was before me, and I read his book, Dirt to Soil, a couple of years ago, and how transformative it was of, learning about his experience in agriculture,
Yes.
and then moving into more of a really land, like back to the land movement and using the cover cropping and the implementation of animals into the system was fascinating.
Yeah. He is incredible. But actually, for this particular series, you're my first on this series. He is in March, I think. So you should try to sign up for him and come on and listen to him because
I must have misunderstood.
he's amazing.
Yeah.
That book was just such a game changer for me and how I approach the soil is just awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fascinating. Well, I must have just saw you marketing his upcoming talk
Oh,
then. So I
yes.
will definitely join for that.
Yes. No, I hope you can join. All right. Well, I'm sure we're still going to have people log on. We have almost 100 attendees here so far, but for the sake of respecting your schedule and your time, I think we should go ahead and get started. So, all right, everyone, welcome. Thank you so much for logging on. I'm Angela of Axe Root Homestead. If you're unfamiliar with me, and today I have Lindsey from Herbal Academy, and she is going to talk to us about the home apothecary. Just a couple of things before we get started. We are hoping to have a short Q&A at the end of today's webinar. So please refrain from asking your questions until the end, and we'll have you type those up in the little chat box. And I expect that many of you have questions, so we'll do the best that we can with answering a few. But otherwise, grab a notepad. And again, this will be available for streaming on YouTube at a later time. I'm going to send it over to Herbal Academy as well, so they will stream this where they feel appropriate. But if you don't feel like taking notes today and you just want to be present, you will have access to all of the content later. So are you ready to get started, Lindsey?
I am.
Okay. So thank you again for being here. I want to talk to you today about this whole shift that's been happening when it comes to getting back to the land, getting back to nature. And a lot of people are really becoming interested in the homesteading movement, and that kind of segues into the home apothecary. And so why do you think that folks should consider taking some medicinal herbs into their own hands, or why do you think they should consider having a home apothecary?
Yeah, I think that the whole idea of a home apothecary is just such a long-standing tradition in our species, So if we look back into the history of medicine, we really see that there were always, plants being used and applied for beneficial use. If you actually look back to the root of apothecary, so, really starting with what is an apothecary, right? So apothecary comes from the word aesthetic of the Latin root, which meant storehouse or warehouse. And basically it was a place where goods or herbs or spices were stored. So apothecary is this fascinating term because it transitioned from like a place where things were stored to into really I want to say pharmacy but before pharmacy was even a thing, right? So
Yeah.
apothecaries were a place where, um, think like, imagine the 1500s in like some small town in Europe or something. Like there is this store that's a historical CVS, right? Like not only did they provide herbal preparations for people to use for their health, but they also did sell goods. And then apothecary became synonymous with actually the person who was supplying these like herbal preparations for use in health. And so this is, a longstanding tradition of use. And then when we move into more modern times, we have pharmacies arising, particularly once we started to create pharmaceutical medicines, which was really like the early 1800s.
Hmm.
So yeah, like 1804, the first drug was, the first active constituent was pulled out of a plant. So that was actually morphine from the opium poppy. And then we move into quinine from Chichona bark, the Peruvian bark, and that was used for malaria and still is to this day. And so we have this period where we move from apothecaries being places where people got herbal preparations and into more pharmaceutical medicines and pharmacies being really linked into the modern medicine system in which we have today. But I believe that everyone should have autonomy in their own health and well-being. And they can do that by cultivating a relationship with plants on their own and then creating, their own little storage house in there or cupboard or cabinet or what have you, and that you can reach to in times of need. And not only in times of need, but really when we look at herbs, they're wide ranging. I mean, a lot of herbs are food. We have plants like we have blueberry, right? So any of the dark colored berries that are blue or purple, those are really used in herbal medicine for cardiovascular health. So we have these food plants, and then we can move to the other end of the spectrum where we do have more low dose botanicals, but really where we're at now is this beginning place, right? Where we're utilizing plants to increase our health and well-being. And so by cultivating relationships with plants, you can not only develop knowledge into how you can apply those plants, but you can also create a little storage of your own, to reach for when you see fit.
So it's really not surprising at all then when people get into homesteading or like more self-sufficient living that it kind of falls in line with wanting to gain knowledge and have your own sort of medicinal apothecary of plants at your fingers and at your fingertips. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. So if someone wanted to get into this, had no experience whatsoever, what might be some key ingredients that they would have on hand or that they might even grow in their own space?
Yeah, so this is, such a fascinating question because it's like, sure, I could pick 5 herbs that I think everyone should have on hand, but really, I think it depends on the place that you're coming from.
Mm.
Do you want to start by cultivating relationship with the plants that are found in, the woods near your home or that are growing in your lawn? There's so many options out there. So I think I want to start with the fact that really by introducing the idea of, cultivating plants for health, you can really try to find the plants that are calling to you. And so you can do that by going out in the woods. Right now, there's not a vast amount out, but pine trees are right there, having pine needle tea, so you could make an infusion with pine needles. You can, harvest the resin of pine, and there's so many ways that that can be used. So pine, just to touch on it a little bit, it's an expectorant applied to the respiratory system. You can use it for wounds as an antiseptic, so much more. And when I look at the homesteading and permaculture community, I think back to the first time that I really gained an awareness of plants. And that was when I started gardening. So I actually got into herbalism through gardening. I didn't grow up with like a plant connection or a family who was really interested in that aspect of living. I grew up in suburbia, and like it was really not anything that was familiar to me. But then I started gardening. And when I was gardening, I was like, okay, this is fantastic. I can grow vegetables. Like this is what kale looks like on a stalk, And
Yeah.
but then with gardening comes weeding. And when you're weeding, you're pulling out a ton of plants that can actually be applied for beneficial uses. So, when you're weeding out your garden beds, like, are you pulling out chickweed? Are you pulling plantain? What about dandelion or ground ivy? I mean, these are all valuable herbs that could be harvested in this process. So, yeah. What about you, Angela? Do you have herbs in your garden beds that you know,
I do.
onto?
Yes. Both quote unquote weeds, natural existing growing plants, and ones that I've put in place, both alike. I do a lot of, well, there's a lot of kitchen herbs that are also medicinal. We have sage and thyme and that sort of thing. Obviously, lavender and chamomile. And then I've got things like calendula. The past couple of seasons as well, I did not come from any sort of a plant or farming background. So I've had to learn a lot of this through hands-on education, taking classes and videos and articles and books. And I am starting to add more and more, now I'm growing things like toothache and different marshmallow plants and feverfew. And I'm really getting into, okay, I may not know how to use these, but I know at some point I'm going to want them. And
Yeah.
so I just am working on getting them established, even though I don't necessarily know how to use all of them right now.
Sure. Yeah. And so what I would love to just draw the attention to though is like there's so many plants that are growing prolifically in the land which we're cultivating that can actually be applied. So when I spend the springtime, getting my garden beds ready and I'm pulling out chickweed, by the handful, we have a large garden space, so I couldn't utilize all of that, but I do pull as much as I possibly can process out, and I dry that, and then I make chickweed salves, which is really great for the skin. It's soothing and calming for any irritations or inflammations that are occurring. Dandelion, every time I pull out a dandelion, I am taking the root and I'm drying it and, either popping the leaves in my mouth, or if it's in flower, I would utilize that part. Violet, so violet is prolific in some places and it's one of my favorite herbs. Violet is so wonderful. It's got a little bit of mucilage, so it's soothing to the skin. It's also soothing to the mind. Violet flowers are incredible. I have so much fun with violet flowers every spring. You can make an infusion of violet flowers, particularly the purple ones. So the ones that grow in my area are Viola sororia. But that's like a type of sweet violet. So the purple flowers of violet can be used to make an infusion that is beautifully colored. And a lot of times these are the plants that are being discarded. Like like they have no value, but all of them are highly nutritious wild edibles,
Mhm.
So that is a really important note to make.
There's our guest. We have
Yeah,
a guest.
we have my cat Fox will be joining us.
I love
So
it.
yeah, so we have these plants that are, again, kind of deemed as invaluable to us, and we make room for other, vegetable plants, but really chickweed is an incredible edible. My son every spring he makes me a salad with chickweed greens as the base, and then he goes and picks violet flowers and red buds, and he mixes it all together, and it's just such a joy to interact with herbs on this level. So as you're homesteading and as you're gardening, really trying to look at those plants in a different light. And importantly, of course, as with any plant that we're working with, we need to have positive identification and we, know what we're working with. But so many of these herbs are food plants, and not only are they food, but on that nutritious level, but they can also be applied for medicine. So as you're going through that process, I just really think that it's important to take a different view on these plants. And as you're reading or as you're, I feel like sometimes with chickweed, I'm just like, okay, it's too much chickweed, but you can cultivate relationships with these plants and then really learn about their value to you as a human. So I think that that's one of the ways in which, I think as you're starting out, you can really begin to connect with plants. And then I already mentioned, foraging is a fantastic way to learn the plants that are around you. When I am foraging, I'm oftentimes looking at what's invasive in my area and then trying to utilize those because we have so many species that grow in this way that we are frustrated by their presence in our lives. And it's like, okay, well, I get that. We can crowd out native species and that makes sense. But when I'm harvesting rose, I'm reaching for Rosa multiflora. It's an invasive species in this region, and people, I've seen stalks that are taller than houses and like as thick as your wrist practically. And so I can't make a dent in that in my foraging, but I certainly, when we're foraging as herbalists and as people who are beginning to become interested in the plant world, we need to be really conscientious of sustainability, right? So I live in Southwest Virginia in Appalachia. I have seen wild ginseng on 2 different lands. It's not something that we come across often because it's been over harvested. And this plant is a really special plant in our field, but I would never harvest it. I would never harvest it. And I would only buy cultivated sources. So on that other end of the spectrum, you can look at invasive species. Another one that I love to work with is honeysuckle. So we have Japanese honeysuckle, the Lancera japonica, and I love making vinegars with honeysuckle. So I'll dry the flowers and then I will or apple cider vinegar or any other culinary vinegar of your choice. And I'll infuse that. It's this beautiful floral flavor, a little bit of bitter, a little bit of sweet, and it's such a joy. You can add honey and make it an oxymel. So an oxymel is honey vinegar mixture. Yeah, and really trying, or dandelion. Dandelion is literally the poster child for Roundup, right? Like this toxic chemical that's applied in practice, in farming practice and in lawns across the US or other countries. And dandelion is such a wonderful medicine. And it's interesting, I just said medicine, but we will talk a little bit later on about the use of terminology in herbalism. And, medicine is one of those words that we really need to be careful with because herbalists are not medical license holders, and medicine is a word that should not be actually applied, though it commonly is. So that being said, dandelion is fantastic. The root is wonderful for the liver. The greens are a nutritive tonic that you can, eat in the spring and really increase your vitality and health through. Just so much more. The bitter flavor of both the greens and the root stimulates our digestive systems into action. It has a cascade of physiological effects that occur in our bodies for benefits that are, beyond the scope of our ability to talk about today. But yeah, so foraging is one way that you can connect with plants in your region. And Herbal Academy does have a super wonderful foraging course that is open for registration at this time. So if you're interested in learning more about foraging, that's a great course to take. And then, we have gardening. So as you've already discussed, Angela, one way that you can interact and get to know plants is by growing them. And as you watch them and learn about their growing habits and their, being able to identify them, you can cultivate relationships with them that can also be applied for health. So some of the herbs that I would recommend people start with our calendula. You're growing calendula already?
Yes.
Yeah. So calendula is wonderful. It's so prolific. The more flowers you pick, the more flowers come, and you can dry the flowers and make an infused oil. Calendula is a vulnerary plant, so it helps speed the replication of tissues on a cellular level, but overall just is resinous goodness that soothes our skin. And another herb that I would recommend is milky oats. So Avena sativa is a cover crop, right? Do you work with milky oats as a cover crop?
I don't use milky oat, but no, I do cover crops. That's interesting. I will look up that one.
Yeah, so milky oats is a fantastic herb to use. So in its milky stage, the latex is preferable. So we actually something else I wanted to know. So some of the herbs that I'm going to recommend you grow are really based around the freshness. So with milky oats, as herbalists, we prefer the oats in their milky stage because we get this latex, which is a wonderful relaxing nervine. It helps us to reduce stress. I actually love to talk about it for a specific indication I call worn out brain workers. So people who are constantly using their brains and unable to relax their mind because they're just always have the wheels turning. So milky oats is fantastic. So if you're implementing cover cropping into your homesteading or permaculture practice, choosing milky oats and then harvesting those oats, and you can tincture them. So tinctures are hydroethanolic extracts, and we use tinctures in herbalism because they have a really long shelf life. So I want the milky oats to be fresh, they're not going to maintain that freshness after a day or two, right? They're going to start to go off. I can use this alcohol extract to extract the beneficial phytochemicals from the plant and preserve that for like up to 5 years, in some cases even longer, and then utilize that for that period of time. So milky oats is wonderful. I would also recommend, in the same vein, using lemon balm. So as an herb you choose to grow. So we love lemon balm fresh because it quickly loses the volatile components of the plant. And so when I say volatile components, those are the components that are they're light enough molecules that they can transmit through the air and create that aromatic experience that we have in many plants, and many mint plants, and lemon balm is in that family. And so the volatiles in lemon balm get lost quite quickly. And so when you purchase lemon balm from a grower or some, how long has that plant been in commerce, and how has it retained its value? So lemon balm is a great herb to use. Lemon balm is sunshiny. It reduces melancholy. It lifts the spirits and brightens the mind. And it is really great for use in times of grief or sadness. So yeah, lemon balm, I would recommend growing. Other fun herbs like chamomile, so easy to grow. Bee balm, so Monarda species are fantastic to grow. And these are herbs, they're mostly annuals, so you plant them every year, right? If you want to work with plants in a more like forest gardening or like permaculture way, where you're building up land that you plan to work with for a long time, then I would look at some other herbs that you can use that will benefit you for years to come. So elderberry would be a great tree to plant. And, you're not going to get berries right off the bat, but you will get both the flowers and the berries, which are the two parts that we use in herbalism. And so the berries are so well known now, right? Like when I started in herbalism over a dozen years ago, I had never seen elderberry outside of like little health food stores, right? Elderberry syrup. But now elderberry syrup is like at Target, like it's everywhere.
Yes.
And it's like a household name now. And that's great because elderberry is extremely effective antiviral. It works directly to inhibit replication of the viral cells within our body, the microbes within our body, and is effective at what it does. There's great research showing that it can, lessen influenza from like 7 days to 3 days based on its, double-blind placebo study with looking at its comparison to a placebo. So it's super effective and for good reason. The flowers are wonderful. You can make elderflower cordials. You can dry your elderflowers and save them for teas. We particularly like to use elderflowers for when there's fevers, and you can increase diaphoresis with these. So that means that you're going to open up the pores and allow heat to escape. So elderberry is a great plant to grow. I would also recommend plants like echinacea. So echinacea is another plant that's been over harvested in the wild, but it's easily cultivated. And the roots and aerial parts of echinacea are used as antimicrobials to help in, cases of cold or flu. And it's a beautiful plant, and it's wonderful for pollinators, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And then it's also interesting because we have a lot of other plants that, like, you might plant peach trees because you want peaches, right? I planted peach trees not only because I want peaches. Of course, I do want peaches, but I also use peach as in my herbal practice. So peach is a fantastic sedative. It cools any heat in the body. If you are in your garden and you're having like a super sweltering work day, you can make a cup of like sun-infused peach leaf tea and have a cup, and you'll immediately feel cooled off. You'll feel relaxed and calmed. And I think it's a great not only plant to have for the fruit value, but also for the benefits you can apply it to. So yeah, I think that allows you to, as you learn more about herbalism, you can really see this overlap more of like food and herbs for health and wellness.
Yeah, it's like that saying, let food be thy medicine, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I heard this really interesting saying once that always stuck with me from an herbalist. And, there's this term like allies and how herbs support people. And she was saying, a lot of allies, our plant allies that are really helpful to us, they make themselves seen. So this is why we see dandelion so frequently, and violet. They like people. They're your ally. They want to be around you. It's why they show up on roadways and in ditches, like chicory, for example. And that always
Yeah.
kind of stuck with me, like, oh, that's such a fun way of thinking about it, right? Like they want to be seen. They're like your ally. I thought that was so cool.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I do absolutely believe that. So it's interesting as a clinical herbalist, right?
Mhm.
I have this scientific side where it's like I can talk about phytochemicals and the physiological effects that they have on our body. But then there is this other side of plant connection and really outside of our understanding and the ways that we see the world in our times. But that perception of plants is so steeped in tradition across culture, right? So many people believe, so many cultures have believed that we can learn directly from the plants themselves. And Plant Spirit Medicine is this great book by Elliot Cohen, and he talks about going into I can't remember where it was, but in the Amazon somewhere, and speaking with the people of the indigenous people in this tribe he was working with, and saying, oh, what's this plant good for? And they're like, that's not how it works. Like this plant, it's not like a this for that. It's like that plant cannot be communicated to you directly. Like I can't just tell you, oh, it's good for this, because really the medicine people of that tribe were the ones who could directly connect with plants and learn their benefits directly through them in that communication. And so, again, like this is traditional viewing, and there's so many indigenous cultures that still practice this way. We have a more diminutive view of plants in this culture. And so we think that that's impossible. But I think we have to have a balance between both this,
Mm.
science and magic. And that is part of what I try to bring in my education. Because I do think we need to know how plants work on a physiological effect, their physiological actions. But I think we also need to recognize that we don't know everything and that there's more to this world. So
Fascinating.
nice you
So
said.
fascinating.
Yeah.
I think too, it's interesting how many of the plants you listed are beneficial for pollinators and also make really great additions to not gardens, but food forests and permaculture growing spaces. You touched on echinacea, which is huge for pollinators. Plants like calendula, other people call it pot marigold, that's something that's excellent alongside lettuce, tomatoes, all different types. And I think we forget oftentimes as gardeners that if we don't plant something in a space, that's where a weed is going to show up, right? Mother Nature is going to put something there. So if you can fill your growing spaces, not just with your edible crops, but maybe with herbs and flowers and things that can be useful to you, or some of these quote unquote weeds that could be useful to you, you're going to fill in those gaps and ultimately have to do less weeding, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Which we're all here for.
Yeah.
So we talked about this a little bit with regards to, what you might want to source fresh or grow or forage for. But if somebody doesn't have the means or the capacity to grow something, is it bad for them to source dry herbs? And how do they know if they are good?
Yeah, it's a great question. So absolutely, like there are herbs that I can't grow in my region, or herbs that I don't have the ability to maintain or cultivate. So purchasing herbs is absolutely doable. I would recommend that, cultivating relationships with local growers. So every region has local herb growers at this point, right? This movement has grown in such a great way. So like, for instance, here, like I source a lot of my herbs from Maple Springs Gardens, the herbs that I can't grow or really not can't, but like choose not to, like skullcap and blue vervain are like two of my favorites. And I'm like, not currently growing those plants. I get them from this like regional grower who does a great job, and you can develop personal relationships with these growers. You're also supporting small businesses, and I think that that's a really fantastic way to connect with plants, because I think that this is all connection, and I think that how plants are grown and the care that they're given in that process also affects like their phytochemical makeup, right? So I think that that is really valuable. There are absolutely larger suppliers that I would recommend. And, Mountain Rose is probably the most well-known of them. And Herbal Academy students do get discounts in a lot of these businesses. So, we get a coupon code for students. And I think that's really valuable because that's, again, cultivating relationships between herbalism schools and bulk herb suppliers. But when you're looking at bulk herb suppliers, what you want to look for is that they are sustainably sourcing their herbs and that they are totally transparent in the practices or in the processing of and where they're obtaining the plant material from. And Mountain Rose is really great at that. So then you get the herb, right? And
Yeah.
you then get to say, how you're asking me the question, how do you know if this herb is still in good shape? And so this comes with time and practice, but really it's quite simple. We use our senses, right? If you know an herb well enough, you can get this plastic bag full of plant matter and you can chew on a piece of a root or taste the leaf that's in there and smell the plant itself. You can touch, like some plants are mucilaginous. We're going to be able to feel if they still have, mucilaginous natures. This would particularly be if you applied water to them or chewed on them. But, really using your senses, it's an organoleptic practice. This is using our senses to experience herbs. So not only can you tell if these herbs are still good, so if I get, lemon balm and I smell the herb and I'm like, it doesn't have any of those volatile oils that I'm looking for, it's probably not going to have the same nervous system effect that it would if I had grown it fresh. and used it, you can dry lemon balm, but you just want to use it within a year, where some herbs actually do last a lot longer. You can have dried herbs that are still good after a few years. But when they're going through this big commerce process and being grown, in Western Europe and then dried and then shipped and then in the storehouse, and, you don't really know how long that they've been in process. And good bulk herb suppliers will share with you the date of processing. So that's helpful. Yeah, but using your senses to learn about the herbs, and it's a process to develop the relationship enough to know what the herb should taste like. But I think that's a really valuable aspect of herbalism in another way. And the other way is really trying to determine how the plant feels on your body through your senses. So
Mm.
we at the Herbal Academy, I recently did a free series, which is not currently open, but will be opening in the new year. And you can join our newsletter to get a push on knowing when that is opening back up. And it was called The Sensory Approach. And it was basically educating students through this free series about how to use your senses to determine the energetics, or the quality of an herb, or the effects that those qualities have on our body, like heating or cooling, moistening or drying, toning or relaxing, and then moving that into herbal actions. So when I say herbal actions, these are the terms that we use in herbalism to describe the effects that a plant has on the body. So you've probably heard anti-inflammatory before, right?
Yep.
What I do in this process is explain to you how you can taste an herb, smell an herb, feel an herb on your tissues, and then really kind of get through to how is this going to affect me physiologically, really all just starting with your sense evaluation. So
That is fascinating,
yeah,
because it's true, isn't it, that herbs, they're not sort of an end all be all, one and done solution for everyone. Herbs actually affect everybody's body differently, don't they? Or support them differently?
I think that you're really close. So herbs generally, that is true in some cases. Like there are plants that are thought of as cooling in one system of herbalism and warming in another. And I think that what we really want to look at is the state that the person is in. So
Mm.
because herbs have these molecular makeups that we can evaluate through our senses or through, laboratory evaluation, and determine what their makeup is. And those usually maintain, they maintain that um, makeup of molecules that are going to affect our bodies, but we can affect that through growing habits, the stressors they
Right.
encounter. And so there are ways in which we can alter the makeup of plants, but usually they only have so many metabolic pathways developed that they're going to then, create these metabolites, whether they're primary metabolites like proteins, carbohydrates, or lipids. And then secondary metabolites are the metabolites that aren't necessary for growth and development, but they are the metabolites that are produced in plants, usually for communication or for defense, such as like antioxidants. And, they can call pollinators. I mean, it's fascinating, plant communication is as a field. And so where I'm going with that is that, so we can use these plants and their secondary metabolites in predictable ways on the human body. But what changes and then is unique to individuals is the state that the body is in.
I see.
So we use something called the 6 tissue states in Western herbalism, where we're looking at a specific individual and we're saying, okay, well, where are you at in this kind of energetic paradigm? Like if you are cold all the time and you're underactive and you feel fatigue, maybe you're in like a depressed or cold tissue state, and then we could apply heating herbs, say like cayenne or ginger, to kind of increase activity in your system. And this is a real simplification, but the idea is that herbs maintain, this phytochemical makeup, though it varies. And then we as herbalists learn how to apply these herbs to unique and specific individuals and the conditions that they're experiencing. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, can we be best friends, Lindsay? Can we just like hang out?
Yes, yes.
So
Jersey's not too
fascinating.
far away.
I could just listen to you talk about this all day. Um, with that in mind, I know we kind of talked about it. It comes to what might be growing around you or your unique situation, but do you have a simple recipe that could or may apply to a large group of people that they might want to have on hand?
Yeah, there's so many, I was like, ooh, pick one. But I think I did narrow it down. So I do
Okay.
think that I would love to share about fire cider.
Okay.
This has become quite a household name as well. So fire cider is fascinating because it went through this like crazy legal battle recently. And, I think it was maybe like 5 years ago, it ended where fire cider was this formula or recipe that was widespread in the herbal community. And so fire cider, just to kind of preface, is pretty much pungent herbs. So we're gonna like ginger, garlic, onion, um, horseradish, this it's a base of pungent herbs, and it can be any amalgamation of these herbs that you want, and you can take, fun shifts on that, but really the idea is that you use like garlic, onion, ginger, cayenne, turmeric's often used, these pungent herbs, and you extract them in vinegar. And then after the extraction period, you add honey and you have fire cider. So this is extracting herbs in vinegar is not new. We have the Four Thieves recipe that dates back to like the Black Plague times, where it said that grave robbers made this Four Thieves vinegar so they could rob the graves, which is terrible, of plague victims. And
And
they
not catch
apply,
it.
yeah, and they would apply this vinegar as a preventative. So that is not new. Extracting pungent herbs and vinegar is not new, but Rosemary Gladstar, who I like to call the fairy godmother of herbalism, she's fantastic. She, in California, in like the early 80s, her and her students made this extraction of pungent herbs with vinegar, and they called it fire cider. And then that recipe was shared widely and freely by Rosemary Gladstar. And so throughout the herbal community, we had fire cider. And it was just a part of, it was one of those recipes that everyone knew and loved and used. And then this company came in and they basically said, we're going to patent this, we're going to trademark this name, and then we're going to, when you trademark something, you have to then go after anyone who is selling that to like withhold or to like uphold your trademark. So they went after some herbalists in varying communities. So there was like 4 amazing women who were like, nope, fire cider is not to be trademarked. And they had like a years-long legal battle where they, in the end, were able to get the verdict that fire cider was deemed a generic term. And so the company lost their trademark, and we herbalists get to continue making and enjoying fire cider. So yeah, again, fire cider recipe. Take some ginger, take some garlic, take some onion, take some horseradish, take whatever pungent herbs you have in your garden or your kitchen, throw some vinegar over them. You want to maintain like an inch of vinegar over the herbs themselves and let that steep in a cool, dark place for a couple weeks. You can then strain it. Make sure when you are using any canning jar lids that you place parchment paper over, because the vinegar will corrode the metal. And then if you're using fresh herbs, or fresh plants like the ginger and garlic and onion, you're going to want to store it in the fridge. And add honey to taste. And there you have it. So fire cider is a super effective antiviral, antimicrobial. Anytime that you feel a cold coming on, you can take a shot of fire cider. It's also tasty. I use it in stir fries. Yeah, so that's fire cider.
Thank you. And it's
Yep.
interesting that you said you can use those ingredients in any combination because, oftentimes when you go search up a recipe for elderberry syrup, fire cider, what have you,
Yeah.
people say, no, this is the desired quantity. This is what works. Don't
Yeah.
alter it. But really, you're saying, no, just have fun with it, alter it as you see fit, because really, I guess taking any amount is going to be better than taking none, right?
Absolutely. And it's really like, it's fun, right? It's fun to get the maker side of you going and to create these preparations and then to share them with your people. Fire cider is one that's like, well, if you don't like pungent, you might not like this one. The honey helps to cut that a little bit. But yeah, Herbal Academy has a great blog. So we have hundreds of articles and multiple blogs on fire cider and how to make it, and their guidelines, but be creative. And like, this creation of plant connection is joyful, and you can do that not only in the garden or while you're foraging, but also in your home kitchen as you make these preparations.
I love that. All right, well, I have one more question, and then we'll open it up for any other content you'd like to share, and then a small Q&A, because we're going to get cut off at the 1 hour mark here. So for those watching today, again, save your questions until the very end. We'll try to get to as many as we can. And I also did send Lindsey a list of questions I wanted to talk about today. So this is not springing anything on her. But oftentimes we hear that herbalism or herbal medicine can have a controversial connotation to it. And I wanted to talk to you about that today and kind of get your insight on that.
Yeah, it's so fascinating to me, because when I first read that question, I was like, I'm curious, Angela, what you as a non-herbalist think of when you think of herbal controversy, right?
Yeah.
And I'm happy to talk a little bit about how I foresee it, but when you're so steeped in a world, it's like, well, what is the controversy? This is my normal life. I mean,
Sure. Well, I think,
but
oh, go ahead.
yeah, well, I do plan on touching on both the legality of herbalism and the efficacy. So I think those are the two things that arose for me. Did anything else
Yes.
arise for you?
No,
Yeah.
that was exactly what I was going to say.
Okay, cool. So, if we do a little bit of a historical dive again, if we look back throughout our species in the history of, I mean, plants were used as traditional medicines throughout, right? And so this is nothing new. Plants are an integral part of life as a human. I mean, they clothe us, they shelter us, they feed us, they help our bodies to heal, and so the fact that we live in an age where it's questionable that herbs are effective is fascinating, and especially so because so many of our pharmaceuticals are derived from plant medicine. So a lot of times when we are developing new drugs within the pharmaceutical industry, they're looking at traditional medicine uses of plants, and they're searching for an active constituent. They're pulling that out of the plant, they're synthesizing it, and they're throwing a pharmaceutical label on it. I'm not trying to say that pharmaceuticals aren't valuable. They are, right? Like, there are absolutely great vast changes that have occurred in our healthcare based on the ability to create pharmaceuticals. I think that the thing we forget is that there's kind of a middle ground, right? So if I go to the doctor because I have a virus, they don't have a lot to offer me, right? But if I'm at home and I have my own little apothecary, I can reach for my fire cider or my elderberry tincture or syrup, and I have this space within that gives me autonomy in my own health and well-being, and particularly in those like acute illnesses in this case. So I think that, herbs are effective, and they have been used throughout history as such. And, I think that when I first started studying herbalism, it was like nobody even understood what that was, or and now I'm so glad that we actually have come really a long way, where people know when I say I'm an herbalist, they're like, oh, cool. Like, they don't just think that I'm like, utilizing one particular plant. So yeah, I think that the efficacy of herbs is absolutely real, and we wouldn't have, the ability to look towards plants and develop all these really fantastic, pharmaceuticals that save lives. But again, not only do they have a place in our home apothecary, but plants and the, phytochemical variation that comes in consuming various plants in varying ways can be really beneficial for our health. So as herbalists, we are in an interesting place in our time. So before a couple hundred years ago, right, there wasn't medical licensure. There was no pharmaceuticals. So as even the medical industry as we know it today was being developed, plant medicines were the main part of medicine, right? So I just read a book called American Eden, and it was all about Edward Hossick. So he was a physician in New York City, and he is most well known for being the physician who attended the duel between Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr. So reading this biography on him was fascinating because he spent his entire career with the idea that they needed to develop medical garden that housed, showcased, and taught everyone that was in the medical field how, like, where these plant medicines came from. And it was a fascinating read because it really, to me, was just validated the use of plants in this way, and the historical perspective that has so shifted. But again, so before, this kind of modern medical time that we're living in, plants were the mainstay of medicine. And now we have medical licensure, and that means that you have to be a doctor to, prescribe, treat, or diagnose. I say those words. Herbalists in this time, we do not treat, we do not prescribe, we do not diagnose. We have to be really very careful with the language that we use, because we we cannot act as doctors, right? We are not doctors. So what do we do as herbalists? What we do is we educate people. So we have the right under the Constitution to educate people in how they can increase their well-being in whatever varying conditions that they're experiencing through plants. And that is what we do. So I think that the legality of herbalism, we have a right to be doing what we're doing, but we have to be very careful to not cross any lines and try, when I, as a clinical herbalist, have a consultation, I don't have patients. I have clients. I never diagnose. I would never take anyone off of, I would never tell anyone to come off a pharmaceutical, right? But what I can do is I can say, oh, you're experiencing high blood pressure. Well, let's talk about some herbal herbs that we can use to help you in this condition, and maybe some stress relief measures that can go alongside of it. Or let's talk about, like increasing your cold water fatty fish consumption or your dark colored berry consumption to increase cardiovascular health. Yeah, so that is what we do as herbalists. And I think it can be controversial, but I think that there's, in my perfect world, room for it all, right? So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. And I don't want to, if I wanted to be a medical doctor, I would have gone to medical school. I don't want to be practicing medicine. I want to be an herbalist, and I want to be working with plants. And that's, there's space for that as well.
Absolutely. That's a good answer. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on before we open it up for questions?
I think that, the homesteading community and the permaculture community is really so interested, I feel like, from my perspective, in this side of herbalism, but there isn't as much focus on it within those fields. So, kind of joining us over on the herbal education side, you're really going to want to look towards different programs that fit you. So at the Herbal Academy, we have some really great foundational courses that will teach you these beginning steps. If you so choose, you can move further into that. We do have clinical training programs, and then we have an incredible vast array of short courses, from like botanical dyeing to foraging and wildcrafting and botany and so much more. So I, as somebody who's been in this field for a really long time, am super glad to be working for a school that is providing such fantastic herbal education. And yeah, definitely come check us out.
And we have a coupon code
And we
today.
have a coupon code. Yes. Yeah. So we're going to be offering at the Herbal Academy 15% off all of our courses for anyone who's listening and joining in and wants to register for some herbal education.
Coupon code today is Axe and Root. So you're going to spell out AXEANDROOT. And I think that's from now until the 16th, right?
I believe so.
Okay, that's so awesome and so generous. Thank you for doing that. All right, so we have a few minutes left. We are going to automatically get cut off at the hour. So we're going to flip over here. Thank you for holding your questions. I'm going to open up the chat. If your question doesn't get seen today, we do apologize. We're going to do the best that we can. So go ahead and open up your chat window on the webinar, and we will try to answer. Okay. Maddie says, do you cut elderberry plants down to the ground yearly?
No, nope. You get more flowers and in turn more berries.
Okay.
I will say that like pruning is not my specialty. So, but I yeah.
Less work, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you have recommendations for herbs for pain management, migraines, menstrual cramps, etc.?
Yeah, so clinical herbalists do really in-depth intakes in their consultations. And so it's really hard because that's a lot of symptoms, right? I would say working on inflammation reduction in general through, taking nutrient-dense herbs and eating a whole foods diet, is a broad spectrum approach to any inflammatory conditions. But I would also recommend that you look for clinical herbalists in your area that you can work with, so you can really do yourself justice by working on an individual level.
All right. Amanda asks, and this is a good one, I'm curious too, best ways to use multiflora rose. We're over with this invasive and want to make the best of it.
Yeah, so I love to make rose oil. So I do an infused oil with rose and multiflora every year. I harvest as many of those little white rose flowers as I can, and I dry them, and then I infuse them in your oil of choice. And it is not only wonderfully soothing to the skin, but it also gets a little of that rose aromatics and just feels wonderful. So that is my favorite way.
Okay.
You could also make a tea.
A tea.
Yeah, dried rose tea.
Oh, awesome. All right. This next person has 3 questions. We're just going to pick one for the sake of trying to get to people. Anastasia, outside of native plants that may already be growing in your garden or area, what is the best way or the way you introduce non-invasive species into your garden? Do you buy them online or do you transplant from a friend's garden? So maybe the person is just asking, what's the best way to source your herbal plants?
Yeah, so definitely you can start some herbs from seeds. Some herbs require more, interventions before. So like cold stratification it is definitely required in a number of different herb plants. So I would say you can start from seed, or you can find plant growers who do sell starts. And of course, if you have friends, you should always be trading good plants with each other. So yeah.
Friends share plants. Okay, there you go. All right. Kristen says, I'm a natural health educator and an herbalist as well. From researching, I found that unfortunately, there's not an official certifying board for herbalists. Is there one somewhere? And if not, how do you address it when someone tells you that they're a certified or licensed herbalist when they've taken a random online certification?
Oh my gosh, this is a great question. So you can obtain a certificate of completion as an herbalist. There are accredited schools such as like Bastyr or the Maryland Institute of Integrative Health that offer accredited programs, but as an herbalist, you will never actually achieve licensure. You cannot. So you can become an herbalist through education, right? And when you're choosing educational programs, you really need to look for reputable schools, Herbal Academy definitely being one. And I think that if somebody calls themselves a certified herbalist, they're just misinformed, because you achieve a certificate of completion, you do not become a certified herbalist because there's no certifying body within herbalism. We do have, you'll see the initials after my name, we have registered herbalists through the American Herbalist Guild. So this is a peer-reviewed process where it's quite extensive. You have to prove and document so much of your education, your clinical experience, your mentorship. And this is, again, peer-reviewed. So it is a body of peers who say you have achieved a level or a status of experience and education that allows you to be called a registered herbalist. But this, again, still is not licensure. It's not accrediting. It is just a level of achievement that you have gained in your field, in this field. Yeah, so it was a good question. I feel like I got it all.
Okay. And then last one real quick. I think we have 1 minute and 20 seconds left.
Yeah.
Can you recommend a title or a book for absolute beginners?
A title or a book for, oh goodness, that is really tough.
Well, Herbal Academy has lots of them, right?
We do have lots of books. You're usually
Yes.
associated with our courses. I highly recommend our blog for beginning studies, or any beginning courses that we have. Okay. I feel like David Hoffman's David Hoffman was the first herbalist that I read. Botany in a Day is also a fantastic book to enter in one of my first herb books that I ever experienced. And it's actually botany, but it's teaching you about plant families, because plant families all have similar phytochemical makeups that can be applied in predictable ways to the body. So yeah, okay. So David Hoffman's The Holistic Herbal and Botany in a Day by Thomas Elpel are my first two books when I dove into herbalism, if that helps.
It helps. All right. I want to thank you so much for joining us today. This will be on YouTube. Again, code Axe and Root at Herbal Academy. Lindsey, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
It was a pleasure, Angela. Thank you so much for having me on today.
Yes, anytime. Bye, Lindsey. Take care. Bye, everyone.